Another aspect of learning the biz is you have to become a scholar, which means that you have to become interested in the history of your science. And the nice thing about that is that from 300 years ago, when the first publications started to be put into journals and so forth, there is a whole library of papers and reports that have been published in the past and have been bound in great big books, and where you can go to the library and read about who did what when. So what I've always told my students, and I think I said this before in one of these interviews, is that you can't discover anything new unless you know what's already been discovered. And so in order to find that out, you have to go to the literature and you have to read back in time to the very first paper or discovery, and then read forward up to the present time. And because you have to decide for yourself whether whatever is that everybody accepts as being discovered, whether it's really true. And just because it's published in the very best journals like Nature and Science doesn't mean anything really. And so you have to decide whether the data really support what the conclusions were and what then the field took on after that. And what I found is that you find things that you say to yourself, well, I'm not so sure I really believe that.
Right.
And it's written by the very, very most famous people in the business. And so that gives you an idea that there are different kinds of people. Some people you can say, okay, I believe this guy, but I'm not so sure I believe that guy. And the other thing that helps you do that is, at least the ones that are currently living in present time, you go to meetings, you listen to their story, and when they talk, you talk to them afterwards, you go back and reread their papers, and after a whole years of that kind of practice, you ultimately decide what the questions are, and that's the final thing then is that you have to really ultimately you have to decide what your questions are, not what everybody else in the field is all gaga about. Because if you stick to your questions, at least when you start out, you can hopefully you don't have a whole horde of other investigators that are trying to answer the questions that you're interested in. And so that's, to me, that was critical. And it brings up another aspect of things in terms of the educational process of science versus medicine that I touched on, but that I didn't really describe. In medicine, and I went to in medicine, and medicine is good for science because it gives you a very broad but superficial education of all human physiology and biochemistry and metabolism and so forth. So that you have and it also gives you the pathophysiology, so that you get taught about the diseases of different systems, like diseases of the immune system. You have immunodeficiency, like in the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS, or you have hyperactivity syndromes like allergy and autoimmunity and that sort of thing. So you learn what goes wrong in a particular field or organ system of a body, as well as you're also taught about how it's supposed to be functioning properly. And that to me, in contrast to the PhD education in science, is you're categorized into a particular field or area. And then depending on which laboratory you study in, because that's what it is, and it's in your apprenticeship, you're focused down on very, very narrow slice of the business. And then when you finally get your PhD and you graduate, you know more about that particular thing than most other people in the whole field. But it's so focused that after that, you need to broaden and go out and into and that's why most people take 2 or 3 postdocs. And they try to pick postdoctoral experiences where they're similar to, but not exactly the same as what they've already done in their doctorate years. But having done that, in my instance, it was really critical because of the fact that I looked at immunology differently than an immunologist, a PhD immunologist would look at it. Because I looked at it from the standpoint of the whole body. And as we go on in our interviews, I'll go into that further.
Because you had been a physician,
Yeah.
you had practiced,
Yeah.
you had been with patients. It
Right.
wasn't abstracted out to a lab.
Right.
That's very, you just going back a few minutes, saying how you read through sort of the history of the field in a very diligent way because you're trying to gain context
Right.
and figure out exactly where your interests lie. Because you can't do everything. You have to pick something that you like because the field is too broad. And then you become one of the best in the world at that thing, but you find holes in your knowledge. And so you're saying you go back sometimes for 2 to 3 postdocs to try and gain context again.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then when you finally get, so a postdoctoral period, and at least now in the States, is for 2 years. And so you either go from 2 to 4 to 6 years after your PhD, which has already taken 5 to 7 years. And so it's a long process. But after you've done that in different labs, different areas of the country or different areas of the world, you learn a lot of different people in the business, and you have a better view of what you're interested in and what you want to attack. Then the problem is getting another job, which is a big subject, and I don't think we need to go into that now.